Hello, Master. First of all, as a believer, I have gained some new insights from today's lecture, some new feelings about facing life and facing the world. I've heard that many Western scientists are currently using logical and analytical thinking methods to try to explain the truths and teachings of Buddhism. What I want to ask is it possible for them, through logical reasoning based on the material world, to unravel the mysteries and truths of Buddhism? Thank you, Master.
Actually, Western scientists are not only trying to verify the reliability and correctness of Buddhism through material means or inference alone, but many of them also seek to understand the truths of Buddhism through personal practice and experience. So, when we want to know the authenticity of Buddhism, of course, first of all, as a scholar, the reliability of theory and theoretical support are indispensable. On this basis, one should also engage in actual practice oneself. Nowadays, many people use philosophy or reasoning to examine and verify things. In fact, some of these verifications are absolutely wrong. According to what is said in the Buddhist scriptures, even scientists today, when they discover three-dimensional or multi-dimensional systems, find that what our senses perceive is absolutely mistaken and not real. So Einstein also said that up to now, what science has discovered is only the material that exists, and the matter that does not exist has yet to be discovered. In other words, science only relies on certain instruments to discover some of the problems with things that exist, but many things that do not exist are the current views of some philosophers. In human history, when we judge matter, it's a process of negation upon negation. We keep exploring and then refuting the views of our predecessors. In this way, there is even less truth that comes from reasoning alone. But if you truly practice, for example, in Buddhism, there is a specific practice dedicated to observing the true nature of one's own mind. At that point, you will have completely understood it yourself. Even if 1,000 or 10,000 scientists or atheists stand before you at that time, the nature of mind that you have realized and understood, no one can do anything about it. In many Zen and Vajrayana stories, the deeds of countless great accomplished masters throughout the ages, when we look at them, we all think, wow, the history of Buddhism is truly mysterious. But in front of those who do not believe in Buddhism or do not understand these principles, even if you say it for 100 times or 1,000 times, it actually has no meaning at all. Thus, regarding these issues, we need to go even deeper, especially by gaining understanding through direct experience and practice, which is the most thorough way.
Hello, Master. What is the biggest difference between Tibetan Buddhism and Han Buddhism? Is the unique feature of Tibetan Buddhism the practice of Vajrayana debate? Is that correct? Thank you.
The debates within Tibetan Buddhism can actually be considered a distinctive feature of Tibetan Buddhism. Of course, Tibetan Buddhism also has many other unique characteristics. Through this kind of debate, we can resolve our doubts and develop genuine wisdom. Perhaps in universities, there are actually some very good methods of reasoning and debate like this. But I've noticed that some college students' debates aren't really debates, they're just arguments. As they talk, it ends up with them insulting each other. That's not debate. In fact, in a real debate, no matter how intense it gets, you won't get flustered, angry, or upset. This requires long-term training and practice. For those individuals who have never debated before, even a small or minor disagreement can sometimes make them feel quite uncomfortable inside. I've noticed that when many of us debate, there really needs to be genuine logical reasoning involved. This is very important. In this regard, Tibetan Buddhism does have some unique characteristics.
I'm Tibetan as well, and I'd like to ask a question. I'm a graduate student from the School of Management and Engineering. I'd like to ask a question because my research focuses on public issues, including some recent incidents involving things like bacteria, food, and milk powder. They're all food safety issues. We all study how government actions can regulate society, but government regulation has had almost no noticeable effect. Serious food safety, including things like gutter oil, these are all highly unethical behaviors, including the recent incident with little Yue, where that child was run over by a car, and even after that, no one came to help. It feels like the morality of our entire society has declined. How should we use Buddhist thought to educate people, including in some of our approaches to government management? Thank you.
caring about society is indeed still very important. Actually, what you just mentioned, the little UAU incident some time ago caused a nationwide sensation. This includes the handling and management of gutter oil, as well as certain related behaviors. From what I have learned previously, in countries like Japan, they actually take used oil and process it into fuel through highly profitable national programs. While in countries like Germany, some rely on legal sanctions, but now, especially in the Guangdong area, we may have also noticed in some news reports, including the bosses of gutter oil factories, who are still blatantly and even seem quite proud of themselves when they talk about it. This is a significant moral issue for our entire society. But I think whether it's the little UAU incident or, as some newspapers reported a while ago, that 1.3 billion people can't save one elderly person. Actually, some of these cases might be the media trying to attract attention and deliberately exaggerate an incident that happened in some corner so that the whole world knows about it, making it seem as if people everywhere have no conscience. But it's actually not that serious. In some places, we still continue to see positive things happening. For example, there was a university student in the city of Shenyang who bravely saved people on a public bus when someone was about to attack the driver or possibly another passenger. This college student immediately stepped in to help, risking his own life to save them. But nowadays, many of our journalists and much of the media don't spread good deeds very much, while even a small bad incident gets exaggerated and widely publicized. It's as if they think the world has lost all conscience, like everyone's heart has been eaten by dogs. But in reality, I don't think it's actually that serious. In different settings, I've said that in cases like the Xiaoyue incident, we Buddhists would definitely step in to help, no matter what. But no one would blame you after you go to help. It's impossible that everyone is that bad, so things won't be like that. And for issues like gutter oil and so on, the government is also trying to find solutions. But most importantly, it probably has to do with the mindset and education of each person in universities. So regarding these aspects, the altruistic philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism is extremely crucial. If our Mahayana Buddhist idea of altruism, without any conditions, is that we should help all people, even all living beings, such a mindset is truly indispensable in today's world. Therefore, I especially hope that many of us can learn about the altruistic heart of Buddhism through various channels. At the same time, we ourselves should also participate in some good activities. Society has not become as frightening as people think.
Hello, Master. I am a student from the School of Electronic Information Engineering at Huazhong University of Science and Technology. I would like to ask you a question about faith. As we all know, people nowadays really enjoy traveling to Tibetan region. I think there is a reason for this because in the Han regions there is no faith. In the mainland, basically, most Han people have no religious belief. Why do people like to travel to Tibetan region? Because they feel that it is a sacred land, and the people there all have faith. I think faith is a wonderful thing, and I am also a Buddhist. But I feel that I have not been enlightened. Sometimes when I am in a bad mood, I copy the Heart Sutra. In this way, my heart becomes calm. But sometimes, just like the story the Master told earlier, it's very easy to lose myself and not be able to find who I am. Also, I saw a very good line in this book, and I would like to ask the Master to give me some guidance on it. To claim to believe in Buddha without truly knowing Buddha is an even greater offense than slandering Buddha. I would like to ask the Master, what does it mean to truly believe in Buddha? How can we achieve true faith? Instead of believing in Buddha just for the sake of believing in Buddha, because for many of us in the Han region, it's like not burning incense when things are fine, but rushing to Buddha's feet in times of trouble. There is a utilitarian approach to believing in Buddha. I think if we want to cultivate a genuine faith, what should we do?
Actually, as I see it, in order to truly have true faith, everyone should carefully study the Dharma. Our faith can be either superstition or right faith. If it's superstition, then whatever others say, you blindly follow. In the end, you still can't find your own direction. Most people's faith nowadays really is a bit like doing business. If I start worshipping Buddha, then Buddha will bless me with good fortune, happiness, fulfillment, peace, and so on. For many people, believing in Buddhism is no different from believing in gods. But many people don't realize that what Buddhism teaches is the truth. This truth is something you can explore with your own wisdom, or with a scientific attitude. Of course, this kind of exploration can't necessarily be completed in a short period of time. Only after you truly study and research will you realize, oh, just as I mentioned earlier, the Buddha is actually so great. He really and truly used his wisdom to illuminate a guiding lamp of wisdom for all the people of this world. For humanity, this is truly remarkable and great. At this point, your faith will not waver. This kind of faith is what Buddhism calls unwavering faith. In fact, we hope that many temples and Buddhist centers, including some higher education institutions and intellectual elites in our society, your level is very high. Currently, the highest are graduate students, doctoral students, and postdoctoral researchers. There is nothing higher. That's already the peak. But even after reaching the peak, when it comes to the basic knowledge of the world, if you also make blind judgments and draw blind conclusions, then that is an extremely simple-minded and foolish act. For example, sometimes I encounter some people in the world with academic degrees, postdocs or PhDs, but when they talk about Buddhism, some of the things they say are truly laughable. Yang Zhenning also mentioned this in his article Physics and Buddhism, that when someone who doesn't understand science tries to judge science, everyone finds it very ridiculous. So when people who don't understand Buddhism try to judge Buddhism, it's also extremely laughable, especially from the perspective of professionals in Buddhism. It's particularly ridiculous. Many of us intellectuals would do best not to make a fool of ourselves. We shouldn't turn ourselves into comedians. This is very important. That's truly one of the reasons why we indeed long to go to Tibetan region.
Hello, Master. I am also from Tibetan region. I just have a very small question to ask. Both of my parents are also religious believers. Under the influence of my parents, I have been reciting some scriptures since I was a child. For example, the 21 praises to Tara and the sayings of Guru Padmasambhava. I think that for us believers, when we are young, we can also memorize some scriptures, either recite or chant them. I believe this is a very good habit. Of course, this should be done without in any way negatively impacting our studies or work. May I ask, what is your opinion on this habit? If one continues with this habit, what are the consequences that can be expected to occur as a result of maintaining this behavior over time?
Generally, among young people, nowadays in many places in Tibetan region, traditionally everyone can recite texts like the Confession of the 35 Buddhas and the 100-syllable mantra, as well as the praises to the 21 Taras, and so on. Everyone can recite these. They are able to recite them from a young age. Moreover, they can recite them at any time, which provides a kind of spiritual support. This is very important. Some time ago, I also visited some of our Tibetan universities. Some of the university students there also recite in the morning when they wake up and again at night. Having this kind of faith and continuously instilling it is very important. But now, among our Tibetan university students, there is something that is lacking. What is it? Sometimes they do not read the meanings of Buddhist scriptures in Chinese, and they are also not in the habit of reading the meanings in Tibetan. In many places in Tibetan region, just as someone mentioned earlier, it's like how many believers in Han regions go to temples to pay their respects and pray for blessings. In Tibetan region, including some intellectuals, they have believed since childhood. But if you really ask them to explain the content of the praises to the 21 Taras, many people can't do it. I find this rather regrettable. In the future, for us, including some intellectuals in Tibetan region, should understand the meaning of Buddhist scriptures through either Tibetan or Chinese. I often visit some universities where there are many students, including teachers. They are so familiar with Tibetan Buddhism. They continuously study Madhyamaka, Yogacara, Tibetan Buddhism, and even some esoteric teachings. They keep practicing without interruption. But many intellectuals in Tibetan region, when it comes to Tibetan Buddhism, let alone Han Buddhism, are not particularly knowledgeable even about Tibetan Buddhism itself. So I especially hope that, regardless of your background, today I see many faces here. Let me see. How many of you are Tibetan students? Please raise your hand. Wow, that's quite a lot. There are many Tibetan students here, so I hope that our Tibetan students should also study and research the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism from multiple perspectives. In this way, it won't just become a matter of theory, nor will it be just about reciting scriptures. If you only recite scriptures, many elderly women in Han regions also chant the phrase Namo Amitabha. We also often recite in that way, following this tradition. For example, when reciting the praises to the 21 taras, the sound is very pleasant and soothing. But if you don't actually understand the content, that's still not good enough. So it's very important to combine theory and practice in your studies.
Hello, Khenpo Sodargye. I usually read some Buddhist scriptures. May I ask if you have read the Shurangama Sutra or the Lotus Sutra? Because these two sutras, I think, are very suitable for beings in the degenerate age. I'm wondering if, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are any scriptures with similar views.
I have read the Chinese Shurangama Sutra. It is said that the Tibetan version of the Shurangama Sutra came later. It is said that either the renowned master Fazun or someone else has already translated it. Here in Sichuan, there is a respected Tibetan master who has read it once. I have read the Chinese Shurangama Sutra once. It's especially good. In the future, when they do the collation for the Tripitaka, they plan to include the Tibetan Shurangama Sutra in the Tibetan Tripitaka. We also have the Chinese Lotus Sutra in Tibetan. In Tibetan, there is one called the Sutra of Compassionate Flowers and the Lotus Sutra. Both of these texts exist in Chinese, and I have read both of them. I should say that the content inside is truly extraordinary.
Khenpo Rinpoche, Tashi Delek. I am also a Tibetan student, and I am now a senior in college. Everyone has talked about some social perspectives earlier, so I'd like to share something from my own personal experience. I feel very fortunate that from the moment I was born, because both my parents deeply revered Tibetan Buddhism, and I myself have great faith in Tibetan Buddhism as well. I have personally gone through many things since I was young. Tibetan Buddhism has greatly benefited me, even during my most difficult times. I have even experienced hardships that were a matter of life and death. At those times, I was able to find great comfort, but gradually I began to notice some things that really felt like drawbacks. Now that we're in our senior year, we're starting to become more realistic. When facing certain competitions, Tibetan Buddhism teaches us perhaps to be more selfless. For example, like a sword, not pointed and aggressive, but rather rounded and blunt. So, when we face competition, for instance, we might not necessarily go all out to fight for something. Sometimes, learning to let go is also a choice. But gradually, in such a fiercely competitive society, I feel there's still some inner conflict when it comes to seizing opportunities. In situations like this, what are your thoughts or perhaps your perspectives? That's my first point. Secondly, as dedicated followers of Tibetan Buddhism, everyone has certain days when they choose to abstain from meat, to not eat meat, to observe fasting. I'd like to know your opinion on this matter. Thank you.
First, in such a highly competitive society, should we perhaps extend for another 10 minutes, just briefly? All right, since many people still have questions, in such an especially intense and highly competitive society, I think as long as we don't harm our competitors, we should face things proactively ourselves. As long as we don't harm others, we should do what we're supposed to do and put effort into what we should strive for. This is also not against the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. Moreover, Buddhism actually encourages us to strive for and obtain all the benefits we rightfully deserve. A great master once said, "The opportunities you receive are, after all, very rare and precious. Therefore, as long as you don't harm others, you can face them proactively." As for the second question regarding abstaining from meat, actually from a historical perspective, it is not entirely a tradition unique to Tibetan Buddhism. This is a practice of the entire Mahayana Buddhist tradition. In the past, we in Tibetan Buddhism did not do very well in this regard. And indeed, compared to Han Buddhism, we did not do very well. So now, and in the future, we are gradually and steadily moving towards actively promoting vegetarianism. Because from a Buddhist perspective, meat is the flesh of sentient beings. Today, I saw that in a restaurant in Wuhan, everything was meat. I couldn't find any green vegetables at all. I walked around several times, but there was really nothing I could do. In the end, I sadly ate a few pieces of fruit at lunchtime today. So when I looked around, I thought, wow, sentient beings are truly pitiful. Just to have one meal, how many lives have to be sacrificed? How many days would it take to make up for that? It's truly frightening, but there's nothing we can do. So as Buddhists, we try our best not to order the killing of animals. At the very least, we don't request it. Of course, it's best if we can abstain from meat altogether, But if that's not possible, then at least don't order the killing. Otherwise, just as it is stated in the Buddhist scriptures, one will have to pay with many lifetimes of one's own life, which is also extremely frightening.
Master, hello. I have just one question to ask. First, let me give an example. For instance, there's a person who sees through the ugliness of society, so he turns to Buddhism for faith. He seeks a kind of transcendence for himself, to rise above this society. At the same time, at home, he has parents who genuinely need his emotional and practical support. So a conflict emerges between these two important things in his life. If he pursues Buddhism, he fails to fulfill his duty to support his parents. This kind of conflict makes the person seem rather selfish or self-centered, right? May I ask, Master, how do you view this issue? Between his Buddhist faith and caring for and supporting his loving parents, the conflict between his filial piety toward his parents and his Buddhist beliefs. How should we look at this problem? Secondly, how should one handle the relationship between these two?
Actually, some people may indeed not be very filial. They leave their parents as a way of escaping for themselves. This kind of behavior. In Buddhism, such a person is not considered to have truly renounced the world, nor to possess genuine renunciation. There is another type, someone who truly sees through the illusions of this world. He repays his parents' kindness by becoming a monk, dedicating his life to spiritual practice and showing deep gratitude for all the love and support he received from them. Master Lianchi of Han Buddhism also said, "When parents are freed from worldly defilements, only then is the child's path accomplished." He said that if one's parents are able to leave behind the dust and defilements of the world for the children, this is truly a way to repay their parents' kindness. That's why in Buddhism, we often talk about great filial piety. In other words, true filial devotion is actually when the child helps the parents ultimately develop right view. This is the best way to repay their kindness. If we only buy them a house or provide for them financially, maybe their life in this lifetime will be a bit better. But it doesn't solve things for lifetime after lifetime. If I commit negative actions every day and just give my parents tasty food, but in the next life the parents may fall into hell and suffer greatly, they won't be able to attain liberation for lifetime after lifetime. So this kind of filial piety is not as good as the child choosing the path of renunciation. The parents may experience some temporary pain. But ultimately, in terms of their liberation and long-term benefit, it should be beneficial for them. There are two approaches. One is a kind of personal escape, which may seem unfilial, but if truly motivated by renunciation, it is called great filial piety.
Hello, Master. I am from the International Economics and Trade major. I would like to ask some questions related to my major and Buddhism, because recently I have seen many beggars outside. And also, for example, there was an elderly man and his son-in-law, both quite old, who went outside to sell wontons, even during the very cold winter. Seeing this made me feel very upset inside, because when all of us go to the temple to pray, we are all wishing for something. For example, if my leg isn't well today, I pray to the Bodhisattva to bless my leg and make it better. Or maybe my business isn't going well today, so I pray to the God of wealth to bless me. These are all micro-level forms. We pray for ourselves or for our family members. But if we look at it from the perspective of the country, from a macro level, for example, some real protective measures implemented by the state, we actually haven't seen them. If we could truly apply Buddhism, could Buddhism really, from a macro and broad perspective, because we say we are cultivating for the next life, this next life means we use the suffering of this life to cultivate for the next one. But does this next life refer to our own personal next life? Or does it include the next life of our country, our nation as a whole in the future? Because many people might feel that right now in China, in terms of material well-being, there is still a big gap between us and the social security in other countries. People worry about things like the level of education and future retirement issues. There are also concerns about inflation. So how can we actually use the teachings of Buddhism to truly help all sentient beings? This is a real and important question. Another question I'd like to ask is, as a master like yourself, if someone sincerely wishes to become your disciple, what would you say? Or rather, what are your requirements for your disciples? What is your standard? So these are the two questions.
Regarding the first question, as you just mentioned, some of the current macro issues in the country, such as inflation, for example, or the overall situation with international economic openness and so on, it is indeed difficult for Buddhism to completely and truly reach every level of society. Any religion, in fact, if it is connected with the highest levels of government, like during the Tang dynasty, or like Christianity in Western countries, when the upper echelons of politics and religious faith are closely connected together, then that religion can reach every level in society. This is entirely possible. If that is not the case, and you expect to change just from the thinking of one or two individuals, it will be quite difficult. However, there is one thing. Nowadays, many university students and intellectuals have come to understand that Buddhism is actually peaceful and non-violent. And it's not because I am a Buddhist that I want to promote it within this circle. It's not like that. Because we are Buddhist, or because we want to advocate for Buddhism, this includes beggars or the elderly as well. In the future, indeed, in another 20 years or so in China, the country will become an aging society, much like Japan. At that time, if each of us lacks the Buddhist concept of filial piety, I'm actually not worried, because after studying religion, people might all become monastics. I'm not worried at all, because in our Tibetan region, 99% of people believe in Buddhism. But now there are fewer and fewer people becoming monks, but that's not something to worry about. So what am I worried about? I'm worried that intellectuals lack Buddhist values and the concept of filial piety. When a country enters an aging society, it becomes especially difficult. It becomes increasingly hard for the country to bear or maintain its social security system. I think that today's education is not just because I'm a Buddhist myself, that I insist on promoting Buddhism in universities. I don't have such an idea, but indeed Buddhist thought is especially needed by today's young people, and by people from all walks of society. If there is such a spirit of selflessness and dedication, it will benefit everyone in society. Moreover, it will bring significant changes to both families and society as a whole. My thought is whether or not we can truly benefit all beings may depend on various conditions and circumstances, but it is also especially necessary. As for the second question, I myself don't really have so-called disciples. It's just that I often give Buddhist teachings to everyone. During the process of giving these teachings, I often emphasize to everyone that, on the one hand, in Buddhism, it is indeed necessary to have some personal practice and realization. First, you need to understand. After understanding, you must practice it yourself. If you don't practice, no matter how well you talk about it verbally, it still might not be possible to apply it in real life. The second requirement is that, regardless of what kind of life form it is, whether we are human or non-human, we should do our best to help all sentient beings as much as possible. These are my two requirements. That is to say, do your best to improve yourself and constantly seek to learn the truth, and at the same time, the truths you have come to know. Even if it's just a small good deed, care about society and the people around you.
Hello, teacher. This lecture of yours is about the Buddhist view of truth. You also said that the truth of Buddhism is the only truth in the world. But after listening to the lecture, I honestly still haven't really understood it, and I didn't quite grasp the lecture. I want to ask, what exactly is the Buddhist truth that you mentioned? I know that everyone has their own truths, and there definitely isn't just one, but I feel that truth should have a uniqueness to it. But I think that now, maybe for us, for those of us who believe in Buddhism, we might say there is only this one God. But for people who believe in Christianity or have different faiths, theirs is different, and for them it is also the absolute truth. But I feel that if these can all exist at the same time, then for me I think that proves it's not really the truth. I want to ask, teacher, what exactly is the Buddhist truth you mentioned? Could you summarize and further explain this truth? Thank you.
All right. When I talk about uniqueness, actually, in Buddhist logic, we have specific terms for this. There is the so-called all, unique, or entirety. In different contexts, we use these specialized terms accordingly. For example, when we say all the people have arrived, it doesn't mean that all 7 billion people in the world have arrived. When I talk about uniqueness from the perspective of a Buddhist, I believe that Buddhism is the only truth. Of course, Christians and others believe that they have their own truth, and they have their own basis and reasons, so I don't reject that. But the unique truth I'm talking about today comes from two aspects. The first aspect is what I call wisdom. As I just mentioned, whether it's humans or all sentient beings, to completely eliminate our suffering and ultimately attain liberation. This is something that is rarely mentioned in other religions. Moreover, to fully attain the ultimate happiness, such a state, I think there's another point which I haven't emphasized here today. Actually, the great compassion in Buddhism, great compassion itself, is also one of its truths because it extends to all sentient beings. Other religions may mention this. Some say it's permissible to eat the flesh of sentient beings, but not their blood. But even this is difficult to justify. It's also very hard, and in fact quite difficult, to find meat that is completely free of blood in this world. Some people say that it is acceptable to wage war against non-believers, calling it a holy war. But we do not reject these things now. Instead, we have developed a great respect for all religions. However, as human society continues to progress, as the ideas of the 19th and 20th centuries gradually shift, and as humanity's broader perspectives on peace and non-violent social systems are gradually being refined, I think many religions may also have no choice but to praise the truly non-violent religions in our world, such as those.
Hello, Venerable Sir. I am an economics student at this school. Currently, there are many people in Han region, including those who study Buddhism, have some misunderstandings about Tibetan Buddhism, especially Vajrayana. One of the reasons is that they don't understand the rituals and ceremonies of Vajrayana very well. And if they try to ask, they're told that these are secret rituals and not open to the public. But if these things are always kept secret, it will definitely make people feel that it's mysterious, confusing, and even a bit frightening. I'd like to ask, what is your view on this issue? Within the scope of what can be made public about Tibetan secret rituals, can you explain what exactly they are? For example, during the Tang dynasty, there were Shubhakara Simha, Vajrabodhi, and Amoga Vajra, the three great masters of the Kayuan era. They also promoted Tang esoteric Buddhism, but it quickly disappeared in the Han regions. After that, Chan Buddhism rose to prominence. I'd like to ask, do you think Vajrayana Buddhism is in conflict with Han Chinese culture? Thank you.
I think that Tibetan esoteric practices have existed for many centuries, and they have not conflicted with other cultures but have peacefully coexisted. In fact, they are now showing a trend of spreading even more widely. This is not only the case in Han regions but also in Western countries and Southeast Asian countries. As for what is called the secrecy of Tibetan practices, I think that just a ritual procedure or performing a ceremony is not actually very secretive. Our Tibetan consecration ceremonies or recitations. As for the mantras or rituals that were just mentioned, they are all public and can be recited by everyone. These do not need to be kept secret. So what actually needs to be kept secret? It is that within esoteric practices, there are certain unique views and methods of practice. In fact, before reaching a certain level of realization, there are many stages beforehand, such as preliminary practices and observing the disciple for a period of time. After passing through these, it is completely fine. It is understandable that many people do not accept this. At the very beginning, as you just mentioned about Chan Buddhism, when it first began to spread in the Han region, it was not successful either, because some of its views were very profound, including Emperor Wu of Liang at the time. Many people did not accept it. But gradually, over time, many people also went through a process of acceptance. As for the three great masters of the Kayuan era, the propagation of Tang esotericism at that time, it had nothing to do with Tibetan region. Some people think that the disappearance of Tang esotericism back then seems to be related to the secrecy of esoteric Buddhism, but that's actually not the case. Back then, many people did not carry on the legacy of Tang esotericism. There were no successors to continue its transmission and propagation. In this way, any culture will eventually die out. So I think the Tibetan region's system of actual practice, study and contemplation and realization should be extremely well developed. Therefore, what needs to be kept secret is not the rituals or certain behaviors, but rather its most profound insights. These are not kept secret because of any faults. However, if you explain them directly to ordinary people without a certain foundation, they simply won't be able to accept it and will abandon it. Not only will it not benefit them, it could actually be harmful. It's the same with our Chan tradition. If you practice the highest level of Chan from the start, where you're not attached to anything, not even to virtuous actions, for many people this is not suitable. So I think it's the same with the esoteric teachings in Tibetan region.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. I'm from this university's Department of Philosophy, specializing in ethics. I have a question I'd like to ask you. I'm quite interested in the issue of euthanasia. I wonder how Buddhism views the issue of euthanasia. When a person reaches the end of their life, for example, at the end of this lifetime, if illness or something else has already caused them great suffering in life, I wonder whether a person can attain liberation through practicing Buddhism, or, because some people are not Buddhists, they might feel that ending their life is a kind of liberation for them. They might even apply for euthanasia themselves, or ask a doctor to assist them. In other words, physician-assisted suicide. If a doctor, from the perspective of Buddhism, with great compassion and a compassionate heart, sees a patient suffering so much, can that doctor feel that they are helping the patient? I wonder, if the doctor assists in physician-assisted suicide, if they help the patient end their life, are they actually creating negative karma, or are they performing a meritorious deed? Thank you, Master.
Regarding the issue of euthanasia, actually, from the Buddhist point of view, no matter what, we cannot kill, nor can we advocate for it. Why is that? Even if their life is filled with suffering, if we make the decision to choose another way to end their life, in fact, there are serious and significant negative consequences of killing. So, on the surface, euthanasia may seem like giving an injection or using other means to let them be liberated. But for the person who does the killing, it constitutes a grave sin. Therefore, no matter what, from the Buddhist perspective, it is best to let them, even if they are suffering, we should not perform euthanasia on them. If the person themselves personally applies for it, or if another doctor takes such action, then as Buddhists we may have no choice but to go with the flow. Here is the last question.
I am also a Tibetan from Tibetan region. I am from the school next door, China University of Geosciences. I have a question to ask. I usually rarely eat fish, birds, and the like, because they are also living beings and killing them creates heavy negative karma. But sometimes unintentionally, I do occasionally end up eating meat that gets into my mouth. How does the karmic consequence of that compare to, for example, if I know it's fish meat but I still eat it, how does the karmic consequence of that compare from a Buddhist perspective?
Actually, eating fish or other types of meat is essentially about the same thing, in my opinion, whether it's fish, shrimp, or even frogs and so on. But generally speaking, in our habits, many people in Tibetan region tend to eat more beef and mutton. Generally, people eat less dog meat and fish meat. However, nowadays, there's a saying in many Tibetan areas that if you don't eat shrimp or fish, it's seen as a sign of not being successful. Some young people have also started saying things like this. If you unintentionally eat some fish meat, for example, if you happen to consume it without realizing or by mistake, then of course there really will not be any fault in that, as it was not done on purpose or with any intention. And if there is any fault, you can confess it by reciting the 100-syllable mantra or the Vajrasattva mantra. Actually, whether it's fish meat or the meat of other sentient beings, it's best, whether during the process of eating or afterwards, to recite more prayers of confession. This is very important. I saw a proverb that says, eating meat is eating life, especially for many people living by the sea. Just to have a meal, they might end up killing countless lives. This is quite frightening, but there's nothing that can be done. Many people are already living this kind of life. So sometimes looking at life indeed from the perspective of a Buddhist, it is truly frightening, but there's no choice but to live this way. Therefore, engaging in more acts of confession is also very necessary.
I believe everyone has had a very pleasant evening today. This reminds me of a saying: a person may not have wealth, but one must possess wisdom. There are many great masters like Khenpo Sodargye who are spreading the wisdom of the Buddha everywhere, so that 2,555 years later today we can, through the Buddha's wisdom, attain a kind of liberation and happiness. Let us give a warm round of applause to thank the Khenpo.